Hi, everybody. Good. How's the morning been? Cool. How many MBAs in the room? Raise your hands. Nice. All right. We're going to make fun of you guys a little bit. Looking forward to that. I said I had 166 slides earlier. I actually have 164. So we're going to get through that in the next 29 minutes and 30 seconds, I hope. It's kind of two parts to this conversation. I'm going to start with, there's a good number of clients in the room, so I'm going to tell you, we're a little cagey about what we're working on at CB Insights, so wanted to give you some visibility into that. So I'm going to start with that, and then we're going to go into what we call N+1 trends, which are kind of the trends in financial services that we think are worth tracking with a little bit of a longer-term horizon, so more sort of 5 to 10 years. So let's start with this question. What is going to cause massive job disruption? So I was going to make a joke about immigrants, but I'm not going to do that. So we're going to talk about AI, right? The fifth industrial revolution. And, you know, this is from CB Insights Trends. What you see here is obviously there's lots of chatter right now going around about automation and AI, and there's just lots of chatter. And when we think about kind of where we are, right, you think of the sort of the steam engine, electricity, computers, IoT, and now we're looking at sort of this fifth wave of the industrial revolution, which is AI. And so we're going to talk a little bit about AI and then kind of show you where we think it's going. A lot of the talk about AI tends to be around job displacement. Job displacement's a nice term for people losing their jobs, but we like to come up with prettier ways of saying that. This is, you know, and it tends to be blue collar. I think a lot of the discussion is like, oh, truckers and retail sales folks and other folks are going to be hurt by AI. And if you just add up some of these jobs, they're at different levels of risk due to AI, but it's 18 million workers just in the US. So this is based on US Bureau of Labor Statistics data. So it's 18 million here in the States. You know, we think the other side of AI is what we think of as expert automation and augmentation software, or EASE. And this is software that kind of is going after more of the white-collar jobs, right? And so technology that replicates human cognition. So I'm going to walk you through kind of what that looks like. This is already happening, right? And so it's happening in legal. You see it's happening in trading, HR, journalism. So, you know, jobs that historically people didn't think could be augmented or potentially automated by artificial intelligence, it's starting to happen. We'd asked you in the newsletter, how many of you get the newsletter? Raise your hand if you get it. Okay, if you're sitting next to somebody who doesn't, you should smack them. This was, we asked, you know, who's going to, in finance, who's going to be disrupted by AI, and you know, VCs was low, 8%. Investment bankers were low. VCs never think they're going to be disrupted. It's sort of a constant thing. But traders and wealth managers came up pretty high. So you know, this is, I guess, the bad news for those folks is that, you know, AI is going to go after them. So then we thought about, okay, well, what's this EASE landscape look like? This expert automation landscape look like? And we wanted to sort of put that together in the normal sort of CB Insight style, which is a market map. So, you know, you have your trading kind of applications that are going after sort of experts. You have investment managers, Wealthfront, and the like, reporters, editors, so automated insights, narrative science, and folks of that ilk. You see it in accounting and compliance, software development, and the list goes on, right? Teaching assistants, lawyers, HR, marketers, CRM, and it's the first time we've actually put ourselves on a market map, right? So there's a lot of debate internally about whether we were breaking some sort of rule with putting ourselves on a market map, but we decided we sort of deserved to be on one, and this was the first one ever. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what we've been working on, and you can think of it as sort of building sort of a programmatic McKinsey. And, you know, part of the reason that we think this is incredibly important is because how many of you work for big companies? I don't know, over $1 billion market cap, let's say. Okay, a good number of you. I think that's a lot of our audience. You know, this need to move faster and think faster is incredibly important. And a lot of you have probably seen some of these statistics from us in the past. The last 15 years, 52% of the S&P 500 has disappeared. if you were the CEO or C-level at an S&P 500 company back in 1955, by the time the company fell out of the index, you were dead, so you didn't have to worry about this stuff a lot. Now in 2015, that number's come down significantly. And what you see is, Mark Andreessen's maxim of software is eating the world is sort of really happening, right? So great illustration of that. In 2006, 5 most valuable companies by market cap, only 1 was tech. 2011, Apple. 2016, for a period, all 5, tech ran the board, right? And so this is incredibly important to what is happening right now. Probably my favorite visual of all time is this one about technology adoption. So if you look at the telephone in 1900, if you track that, it took 105 years for the telephone to reach 90% penetration. Then look at 1990, where the cell phone comes in. Basically, in 15 years, it got to the same point. And that pace is accelerating, right? And so this is actually a little dated now. So WhatsApp kind of blew Facebook and others out of the water. For those of you who are familiar with the Indian ecosystem, Jio, which is a mobile carrier in India, actually got to 100 million users in 6 months, right? So like the pace of technology adoption is really, really quick. And so then you as an incumbent, and one thing big companies are not known for is being nimble. And so this is should be worrying, right? Your decision making has to speed up, right? And so that comes down to what market should we enter? What are our competitors doing? Who are the insurgents that we need to worry about? And then, what are the disruptive sort of technology threats and technologies that are out there? And the way you guys do this today, in all honesty, is what we call the 3 Gs, right? You use Google, right? And people dress this up and call it desktop research to sound fancy, right? That is fucking Google, all right? All right. Then you use gut instinct, right? And so this is basically, who's the most senior in the room, who's the loudest, who's the most charismatic, and they get their way. And the last is my favorite. You use guys with MBAs, okay? And so, you're sort of bringing a knife to a gunfight here, right? And so we think there's a better way of doing this. And I'm going to show you what the old school method looks like. So you're going to see after the conference, you're going to get access to this Goldman Sachs strategy teardown that we've done. And I'm going to show you what the method looks like with the 3 Gs, right? So, you have this archaic method that you use today. So you have your team of analysts, and what you do is you give them 40 quarters of Goldman's earnings transcripts, so you got that. And then you say, hey, here's 695 startups that they've invested in. And then from there you say, okay, now here's tens of thousands of their job postings. And then you add on to that 268 patents and another couple thousand pages. And then just for good measure, you add on hundreds of partnership articles. And you know what these analysts will do with that is they will throw it all away, right? And what they will do is they will go read one earnings transcript. They will go look up an article on Google News and look at what Lloyd Blankfein said recently, and they'll go read one earnings, and they'll go read one equity research report. And so what that does is you have this incomplete understanding of what's happening, which ultimately drives poor strategy, right? And so with ease, what we're hoping to do is kind of take all this information and turn it into something that is beyond what human beings can do. So I'm going to walk you through something that we're working on. This is what machines, in our view, were really made for, right? So this is kind of, the big sort of nut we're trying to crack is, how do we take all this massive amounts of information that's beyond human cognition and make it useful for everybody here in this room? What you're going to see in the near future, in the next few weeks, you're going to see our research, which a lot of folks who get the newsletter obviously see, and you'll see these kind of little boxes on it. That'll link to sort of deep integration with the platform, so companies, research, news, et cetera. From there, what we found is we get a ton of requests from folks that say, hey, can you unbundle us, right? It's like one of the most common requests we get, because when you need to get senior management excited about something, you could send them a list of startups attacking you, or you can show this very sort of visual way of doing it. So helping you tell stories with infographics is going to be really important. Baking tracking, so if you want to track Goldman, AI, InsurTech, that's all going to be possible. And then instead of that happening in email, you're going to just be able to comment right in the platform. So the Goldman Sachs teardown I talked about, you're going to see that after the conference. I want to give you some sort of sneak peek at a couple things that we've done as we've mined all the data. When we look at Goldman's investments, you see this sort of focus on payments tech, infrastructure, and data analytics. when you look at their patents, they've actually started to pick up their sort of distributed ledger patents. So you see, again, kind of areas of focus for Goldman. Other areas that we think are interesting, this one we think is really telling, right? So when we mine Goldman's jobs data, you actually see over a third of their jobs are now in technology, right? And so they've talked very publicly about how they're going to automate trading and other things. And so you see they're actually putting their money where their mouth is here and actually investing a lot in the tech side of things. And the other big one that we're working on, we're ingesting now earnings transcript data. So this is a wave chart that looks at what Goldman talks about. And what's interesting and you'll see this in the teardown, it's a little bit harder to glean from this. You'll see Goldman doesn't do a whole lot on South America. They kind of, there's not a lot of chatter for them. And then China's actually an interesting one. When you mine their earnings transcripts, you actually see they sort of go in and out sort of China. So it's hot for a period, then they don't talk about it, and then it sort of flares up again. So again, when you want to get a view into a competitor strategy, we think this is really a unique way of doing it in a way that's more sort of comprehensive, complete, and current. So from there, I've got 19 minutes and another 130 pages. So emerging trends disrupting financial services. I'm going to talk about the trends and what the data reveals there. We call these N+1 trends. So we did this for the first time at the Innovation Summit back in January. That was sort of more, we covered a lot of ground. This is going to be very specific to fin services. I'm going to pick up the pace here. These are, as I mentioned, things to watch out for in the next 5 to 10 years. We do it in our way, which is data-driven, right? We're sort of we call it the pundit industrial complex. We are anti-pundit industrial complex, which is people who just make shit up. So, again, ingesting lots of data, trying to read the tea leaves based on what the data says. Why you should care. Either, we find corporations are motivated by two things. It's either fear or greed, right? So some people are scared of technology. Some people see it as an opportunity. Either one is motivating. So that's why you should pay attention to these. Unbundling the bank, kind of one of our first and most popular graphics. In the middle is Wells Fargo, but we could pretty much replace this with any incumbent's website and pick it apart with all the sort of insurgents who are attacking it. We're trying to make you future literate here. This is some sci-fi shit, right? So I think there's one big thing here is that like when we talk about disruption and we sort of like get roped into all this sexiness here, some of this stuff has like very tangible sort of societal and ethical implications, and so that sometimes gets lost. I'm hoping we can chat about that afterwards and with the team and with a lot of you kind of in breaks and at lunch and things. So trend number 1, Amazon the bank. JP Morgan, 60 million households. Amazon Prime has 66 million Prime members, right? And so when you think about this, obviously Amazon's on a tear. Just the rumor of them entering a space will send your stock price down, right? So 3 to 4 weeks ago, there was a rumor that they're getting into drugstores and pharma and Walgreens and the like, all kind of cratered. Obviously, when they bought Whole Foods, that did not do a lot of good for all of their competitors. They're sort of the everything store in the truest sense of the word, right? So they are in everything now, right? It's, AWS is a beast, and obviously, their e-commerce kind of engine is obviously big as well. Could it be its next target? When you look at Amazon from a customer satisfaction perspective, right, they do better than most of the, all of the sort of incumbent financial services institutions. When you talk to millennials especially, like a lot of them will tell you that they, surveys will say they would prefer to, bank or do financial services with Google, Amazon, Facebook, right? So you have this opportunity here, Alex from Andreessen Horowitz kind of talking about if they can start lending you money and extending you credit, it just feeds the sort of buying machine that they've built. The chatter about Amazon and banking or financial services is obviously increasing. These are some of the areas that Amazon is already in. Great payments traction. We think IP is a really interesting area when you look at Amazon, right? So they're working on facial identity and selfies as a means of payment, right? So IP is a great leading indicator for what Amazon's working on. When you actually looked at, just to kind of play back the Whole Foods acquisition, right? You looked at their logistics patents, logistics warehousing over time. You actually saw a lot more activity from Amazon on the patent side, which kind of, it's hard to predict an acquisition like Whole Foods, but you knew they were going to make some moves here. They've been extending credit to small businesses, cash, again, like their ambition is sort of unmatched in terms of what they're trying to do. And then they play the long game, right? So we look back in the patent database that we have. This is a patent from 2004, right? So they've been thinking about, fin services, either how it reduces friction in their own purchasing process or how to own more of that sort of value chain over time. They're going to go after different segments. I think this is really sort of one of the things that they do. So how will they and when will they take on more of the banks? So I think one of the first N+1 trends we think it's worth looking at, and obviously who would be affected, it's probably everybody in this room. So virtual real estate moguls, this is one of my favorite ones, right? So how many of you anybody play Pokemon Go in here? Anybody? Yeah, okay. So version 1 of virtual real estate was domain names, right? And so this is what they sold for. As you fast forward, now the virtual goods industry is worth $15 billion, or in 2012 it was. And Pokemon Go, did $1 billion in 7 months, on their game. And now what you see is actually this real exchange rate between virtual and real currency. So you can actually translate kind of your virtual coins into real hard money, or Bitcoin, I imagine at this point. And people are making real money, right? So the opportunity here is there's actually like property developers emerging in virtual real estate, which is kind of crazy, obviously. This is the Wild West a little bit, so eBay doesn't allow you to sell World of Warcraft items on eBay, right? But people want to do this, and they'll find other ways of making that happen, right? So what does that mean? There's lots of virtual good marketplaces that are now cropping up, mostly outside of the US. What we were thinking about is, well, do folks who are in the real estate world, in sort of tangible real estate, are they going to get into here? Right now, Westfield's the only one that even has a virtual reality play of any kind, and I'm not sure that the incumbents have any natural advantage in virtual real estate, right? But when you think about what does this mean, are you going to be extending mortgages for virtual real estate, right? Like some crazy ideas here, right? This is our early stage real estate market map. Are we going to basically have a counterpart to all of these companies focused on virtual real estate, right? So again, big opportunities here. Will these things become as big as, normal, sort of what we think of as normal real estate? So I think a big opportunity here, again, when you look at over a longer time horizon, insurers, property owners, real estate incumbents obviously are impacted by this move towards virtual real estate. Instant mortgages, how many of you have a mortgage? Raise your hands. How many? Keep your hands up if you enjoyed the process. Right, so, not a good look, right? $7,000, 400 pages, 50 days, 25 humans to process and originate a mortgage. CIO of Experian says it's broken. You have obviously a lot of kind of startups now who are trying to digitize the home loan process. Rocket Mortgage, kind of one of the early successes here in terms of getting to approval decision in minutes. But can you sort of do the Uberification of mortgage lending, right? Can you get sort of with data analytics, can you get instant mortgages, right? And reduce a lot of this pain that happens today. Can you use, and so you have some of the Fannie Mae's and Freddie Mac's trying to come up with uniform sort of requirements here. I'm not sure like the innovation in this world is going to come from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. No offense to anybody from those organizations who might be here. And then, how do you use satellites and algorithms to, do estimates of properties in real time? How do you reduce a lot of the friction in the mortgage lending process today? Again, impacts around financial services firms, those mortgage companies that sort of are involved in the process. Robot-run bank branches, right? And so you see here, Amazon's already talked about having a store without cashiers. So why is that not going to apply to banks, right? And so from a automation of repetitive tasks, being able to be open 24/7, increasing sort of scale of operations. And so what does that look like? the bank of the future is, do you have drones that are doing security? Do you have robots that greet you in your preferred language? You have robo-tellers, and then you have kind of AI infused sort of financial advisory tools that help you right in the branch. It's already happening. I think we're seeing this in Japan right now already. So robots being deployed to help kind of improve customer relationships. Security robots already happening as well. So again, like the idea of the robot bank, we think is really something to look out for. Owning your own identity, so trend number 5 that we're paying attention to. So right now there's the data gatekeepers, right? And what we could add to this is Experian, D&B, Axiom, et cetera, right? So there's a bunch of folks that own your data, own our data. They make a lot of money, as you can see. But the collectors of data and the creators of data sometimes have different priorities, often. Right? And so these misaligned incentives lead to these kinds of stories that you see. And so you have your antiquated sort of state-issued IDs. In India, there's stuff like the Aadhaar card that they're working on. But again, what happens if this type of system gets compromised? And so what we're thinking about is, is there sort of decentralized self-sovereign identity that happens here using blockchain, right? And so then basically you as an individual are the administrator of your own identity. And what that means then is that you control your identity and you will give access to third parties on an as-needed basis, right? And so now, instead of being in a database that anybody can pull you up and look at whenever they'd like, you end up kind of owning and administering your own identity. So we think this is something to look out for. Obviously, with a lot of the work that's happening in blockchain, this is going to be an interesting problem for folks to tackle. The Robo Regulator, right? And so this is just really regulation catching up with technology, right? So right now, this is just the US, right? The SEC has almost 5,000 employees. Can you move to a robo regulation model? You have robots replacing Wall Street, but we sort of, again, are using humans to try to deal with that, right? And so I think, you have algo trading that can use this sort of regulation. Obviously, the SEC is sort of starting to talk about this, and this is something that they're going to look at. And then, what does sort of SEC.ai look like, right? So how can you use NLP and other things to flag sort of behaviors that you think are risky or that you think are sort of, not meeting patterns, and then learning from those over time to make better and better recommendations about behavior that might be fraudulent or that might be problematic. We need more data to do this. There are a bunch of companies now in the startup world that are building sort of the building blocks for this happening that could, maybe if you weave together, could become sort of this robo-regulator. Obviously from a incumbent perspective, right, the cost of regulation goes down the more automated it goes. If you become better at really finding the bad actors, that should hopefully reduce the stress on the good actors out there. And so that's one thing. N+1 innovation number 7. Got 7 minutes, I'm doing well. Massively multidimensional trading simulations. So what this means is, when you look at simulations, a lot of them are in gaming and VR kind of applications, but now there's sort of starting to be talk about using simulations in trading and enterprise kind of functions, right? And so there's a bunch of companies that have raised over $1 billion. So what does this look like in the future? This is a good old Monte Carlo simulation, right? Like, how many of you have done a Monte Carlo simulation ever in your job, right? And so this is kind of the weapon of choice, I think, for sort of, scenario planning of sorts. But, how can we do that more rigorously? So now there's these massively sort of multidimensional simulations that are happening right now to sort of model things like the Big Bang, right? So looking at massive amounts of inputs and dimensions to try to figure out what the world might look like. And so can you use econophysics and simulation engines to actually build a sort of real one-to-one model of the economic world? And so what that looks like in the future is, yesterday's sort of hedge fund black box. Today you have sort of the Quantopian model, and then eventually you kind of have hedge fund war games, right? And so them all building these sort of massively multidimensional trading simulations and figuring out what the world is going to look like based on these simulations that they've built. Obviously, kind of the investing market, financial data providers, macroeconomic experts would all be impacted by something like this. Precision insurance, another big one that we think is really interesting. So right now, population-based, sort of group-based mortality tables are how we assess risk. What's interesting is this example from 23andMe. So people are actually gaming sort of insurance by getting their 23andMe test, seeing if they have sort of predilection for certain diseases, and then basically buying insurance in anticipation of that, right? So how are the insurance companies going to do this, right? So insurance companies then using genetic testing, which the cost has come down significantly, to basically understand mental health risks, susceptibility to different diseases, and then basically be able to build policies that are very person-specific. Obviously, the cost of doing this testing has come down significantly, which is why this is possible today. You have disease prediction by this company, All of Us, that's happening. The protection of genetic data, this is one of those like ethical kind of quandaries right now. If you look at sort of our own personal privacy, like over time, people will give up a lot of their privacy for a better deal, right? Like that's just the reality. And so if you look at where genetic testing and data is going, it is likely that it will become more and more open and available over time. And then as a result, insurance companies are going to be able to use that, right? And so we're already seeing some partnerships here, MassMutual with Human Longevity Inc., Anthem with Color, right? And so like how do they use genome sequencing to do what they do better, build better insurance products, predictive genomic data, individualized sort of stratification models for risk. And so what ends up happening is that you end up, individuals who might have been considered low risk before, so affluent or who look fit, will actually be transitioned to higher risk categories given the level of precision we have about what their makeup is. And then vice versa, the other thing will happen as well, where some people who were perceived as high risk actually aren't. And then you'll have this sort of broadly defined risk pool going down to very individually sort of stratified sort of risk subpopulations. So obviously the insurers, employers, policyholders are all impacted by this. Last couple things, the alternative data census, right? So tons of data being created. The US Census, and I think most countries have some sort of census that they try to do, is having trouble, right? So it's at high risk right now for any amount of government reasons right now. We have this sort of thing happening. The Census Bureau is trying to pull in other data from other government agencies right now, and so that's one opportunity. But there's a bunch of other data, the alternative data that they can start pulling in. So there's myriad data sources out there. So how is the census eventually going to be building in these other data sets? This is sort of the alternative data landscape. So everything from satellites to purchasing behavior, et cetera. When you look at it, BuildZoom built this sort of home building index, and it actually models or is highly consistent with the census already. So we're seeing sort of private data providers actually be able to do a lot of what the government can do in some senses. Virginia Tech did this study to look at data sources and see which ones might have sort of predictive or forecasting value, and sort of whittled down from 11 data sources. So again, these are data sources that the census could use. And so what that ends up doing is cutting billions in costs, increasing the frequency at which you can do these, I don't know, what's the plural of census? Censi? So you can do censi, you can add new survey types. So this is kind of the opportunity on the census front. Last thing, human IPOs. Let's start kind of with the craziest one at the end, I guess. US household debt, $266 trillion in 2016. What if we could sell equity in ourselves instead of raising debt, right? And so it's kind of an interesting idea, right? So you basically sell your future earnings and productivity to the market, right, in order to fund upfront costs, whatever they might be. Education's obviously one application of this, and obviously this is a big, this is sort of the other shoe to drop that people talk about a lot is this massive overhang of student debt. And when you look at it, based on what you graduate with, we have a pretty good sense for what your median lifetime earnings are going to be. So can we take a different model to fund that education, right, versus debt, and so that being equity? Could you use this to increase your productivity by actually investing in your healthcare and your well-being, which today a lot of people actually put off kind of healthcare expenditures because of the cost associated with it. But if that ultimately can hurt productivity and your long-term earnings potential. This is GoFundMe, so this is kind of the amount of money raised on GoFundMe that's tagged as medical, right? So almost over $350 million raised on this crowdsourcing platform. Again, these are just grants, I guess, in a sense. They're just donations. I'm not sure I agree with this quote, but why shouldn't people be part of a portfolio? I guess it's an interesting way of looking at it, and it's possible. It's actually been done, right? So this one gentleman sold himself for $1 a share, and this is Mike Merrill's share price over time. And the interesting thing here is, can you have activist hedge funds that tell you how to live your life, right? So, a lot of people don't think Mike should have a vasectomy, which is good. He should stop sleeping through the night, and he should become a vegetarian. So, as humans IPO, what's the role of the investor in sort of determining your life choices? It's an interesting thing to think about. So, there's already sort of startups betting on this, right? There's some that are you can buy equity in sports players. So, it's sort of starting to happen in some form, and we think it's an interesting thing to track. A new breed of sort of underwriting now comes to being if this happens, where you actually are assessing now the risk of people in a different way than maybe an insurer would. But again, it's assessing risk and figuring out how much the equity in an individual is worth. Obviously kind of, who is evaluating, who's conducting the IPOs or the, I'm not sure what we're going to call them, the human IPO. So that is all I have. These are the things to watch out for in the next 5 to 10 years. I think this is one of the big themes to take away is that when I was at American Express, we used to spend lots of time thinking about Capital One and Citi and Visa and MasterCard, as we should, but the competitive lines are getting redrawn. This is an example from India where CPG companies were actually losing share, it wasn't Unilever and P&G arguing with one another. People were actually just spending more on their mobile data plan, right? So their competitor was somebody that they never thought would be a competitor, and I think that's an increasingly important thing to see is who are these insurgents or who are these incumbents in other spaces that are going to come after a piece of the pie that you currently are playing in. Unusual competitors emerge. GM acquired Cruise Automation. When you look at the LA to San Francisco flight, it's, I think, the third most trafficked route in the US, and you have to believe that GM is going to, when autonomous vehicles become a thing, is going to go after that, right? So again, airlines and GM, I don't know if they necessarily think of each other as competitors, but that is going to happen. You have Amazon, Whole Foods, expect the same in financial services from some of these big tech players. I think this is the other big thing. When I was at Amex, we used to spend a lot of time talking about basis points, right? Share of basis points, who's got X bips more. These insurgent models are coming for a comma. They're not coming for your bips, right? So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. So, and then those of you who don't, this is what you get to look forward to. Thank you for the time. I'm over. Thanks. I'm going to introduce Rebecca Blumenstein from the New York Times next, and she'll take it away. Thank you.